Hello everyone who's watching from home. I want to welcome everyone who is here this morning. We are having a little brunch, what would you call it, here in the chancel, and enjoying some good coffee and some good company. We're sorry that folks couldn't join us today, but you get to watch online at home, and I will introduce our speaker today, the Reverend Dr. Jeff Nowers, who most of you know is my husband. And so I want to welcome Jeff here this morning. Thank you for giving us some words today on why have so many people abandoned the church, or is that what it's called?
Give it up.
Given up. Why have so many people given up on church? Jeff will talk for about 25 minutes, and then
25 minutes.
and then we'll open up for discussion. All right, go.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. We have a smaller crowd today, but thanks to all of you for venturing out in the fog and coming here. And let me just start by acknowledging that we're gathered here on the traditional lands of the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee peoples. And I'm grateful, as I'm sure we all are, for their historic care for this land. And may we all strive to walk into the fullness of reconciliation. So we're gathered here today. You're not really here to hear me, I don't think. You're probably here because of the topic. And the question is, why have so many people given up on the church? That's the big question. It's a complicated question. It's a complicated answer, and it's an important question to me because I'm a bit of an anomaly. I'm part of what's called Generation X, and Generation X, roughly defined, refers to people who were born in the mid 1960s up until about the roughly the Vietnam War. Vietnam War era babies are Generation X, and I was born right at the peak of the Vietnam War during Nixon's presidency, and that was a time when churches looked a lot different than they do right now. And my generation now very rarely goes to church. So I'm a bit of an oddball in that I'm connected to the church, and not only am I connected to the church, I'm ordained to serve the church. So I mean that's even more of an anomaly. So I've contemplated why it is that my generation and so many others, older and younger, just don't go to church anymore, or never even gone to church. So what I've done is I've thought about this, and I've thought about this for actually a number of years now. Six factors. I've identified 6 factors, I guess, over the last 80 years that I think maybe help to answer this question of why have so many people given up on the church. So I'll offer the 6 factors. I'll talk through them a little bit. You have it up there on your handout, and I'll talk through each of the 6, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion afterwards, because I'm sure you're going to have your own take on things. Maybe I've missed a point or two. Maybe there are other factors that you want to add to this list. But let's go right into factor number 1. And I've called this factor horrors of war, questioning the goodness of God. So I don't think this happened immediately after the Second World War, because church attendance actually increased in the 1950s after World War II with the baby boom generation, and you had fathers coming back from the war, reuniting with their families, and I think that families wanted to kind of go back to the routine of going to church and doing things as they were before the war. And so there's a bit of a boom in the early 1950s. But by the end of the 50s, attendance had begun to drop. It was on the decline. And I think that many veterans of the Second World War, they refused to discuss their experiences in the war. My grandfather was just like that. I think I remember asking him a few times about his experiences in the war, and he didn't want to talk about it all. There was only one time I remember he, in a car, it was just the two of us, and he slowly began to open up. But even that was very, very difficult for him to do. I think a lot of veterans were very traumatized by their experiences, and especially those near the front lines. And the question of where God was in the midst of war, is God really good? That became unanswerable. Even though, as I said, church attendance initially after the war climbed a bit, but I think as that question lingered, it became unanswerable. And preachers weren't giving homilies and sermons that helped with that question. So I have a quote here from an issue of Commonweal magazine. Commonweal magazine is it's a great magazine. It's a Catholic, broadly Catholic magazine of religion, politics, and culture. In their March issue of this year, earlier this year, there was an article there, a man named Timothy Schilling, who wrote a little piece reflecting on his own upbringing with his dad's experiences in World War II. And he says, "My dad did not deserve that war or his PTSD, and our family didn't deserve their consequences. Sometimes I think I should be filling a missing person report on our Father in heaven, who stands by while wars happen and families are broken, while we humans perfect ways of killing one another." I think that kind of sums up this factor of disappointment with God, disillusionment with God, doubting the goodness of God. And this is really, the theologians call this the dilemma of theodicy, the problem of evil. And it's vexed theologians since theologians became theologians. How do we reconcile the reality of evil with the conviction that God is both loving and sovereign? How do we hold all those things together? And I think World War II exacerbated that problem. Theologians have never been able to solve this theodicy riddle. And then when they've attempted to do so, I think that their efforts have fallen flat, and that's only highlighted the intractability of the problem. So in the end, many people have concluded that the belief in God, or at least in a sovereign God, doesn't make sense in the face of suffering and evil. Why go to church? So that's factor number one. Factor number two, I call this different neighbors, immigration and religious pluralism. So, immigration to Canada was, I think as we know, originally from Europe. From France in the 16th to the 18th centuries. And then when Britain took over after 1759, we had more people from the British Isles coming over. We had British American loyalists, including black loyalists after the American Revolution of 1776. And then in the first half of the 19th century, we had the Great Migration of English, Scottish, Irish, those seeking a fresh start for some kind of upward social mobility. Coming over across the Atlantic kind of afforded them that kind of promise. White but non-English immigration, so Scandinavian, Mediterranean, Slavic peoples, that started really in earnest in the late 19th century. And these were people who came and typically worked in mining, lumber, construction, on the railway, helped out on the Pacific Railway. There were also a number of Indian and Chinese immigrants that came around this time, and they would work in logging, also in railway construction. But immigration, I guess my point here is that immigration into the 20th century was rather restricted. It was very white, and it was very racist, the policy. But it opened up considerably with Pierre Trudeau's vision of multiculturalism. And that was a notion of Canada as a salad bowl, as kind of a mosaic, and not so much a melting pot, which is what the American, the U.S. style of immigration was. You come and you're American first, kind of leaving behind, or at least relativizing your culture of origin. In 1988, the Canadian Multiculturalism Act, that is really what enshrined multicultural identity as constitutive of Canadian society. And from I would say the 60s, 70s, and going forward, you had a lot of immigration to this country from African, Middle Eastern, Asian countries, and people would flock to urban centers, and that meant that multi-generational, English-speaking, church-going Canadians, and I guess what Stephen Harper infamously called old stock Canadians, a horrible term. But these folks were now rubbing shoulders with people of other faiths. And so if my neighbor, for instance, growing up could lead a very meaningful life while adhering to another faith, what did that say about my Christian faith? Was it inferior? Was my Christian faith inferior? Was it essential to be a good Christian, to lead a good, fulfilled life? If now I'm observing other people around me, neighbors, for instance, who were not Christian people and who went off to a mosque or to a temple or some sort of other center of religious gathering. So the presence of other faiths, I think, has relativized and weakened at least the presumed superiority of Christian faith, especially among younger generations today. There's more and more interfaith romances happening. Interfaith marriages, they've become more common. And so for some people, if Christianity is no longer the only way or the best way, then why follow that way at all? So that's factor number 2. Factor number 3, moving along here, is I'm calling this one Man on the Moon. How Science Challenges Traditional Theology. I think this is a very big, it's an intellectual factor. I think this is a big factor. There's a problem when we read Scripture of having to come to terms with the cosmology of Scripture and what we know about the world and the universe today. Biblical cosmology simply held to a multi-tiered universe. So you had the heaven, or the heavens, plural, beyond the skies. You had the earth, and then you had below the earth the grave, or what some people call hell, or the netherworld. And Dante, in the 14th century, he famously, through his poetic work, tried to delve into what the netherworld would be like with these nine levels or circles of hell. But up until well into the medieval period, and even beyond that, this image of the world as sort of multi-tiered was taken quite literally. And the problem was that this kind of cosmology, it contradicted developments in knowledge of the universe. So, we know that with Galileo, early in the 17th century, Galileo, through his telescope, determined that the Earth revolves around the sun. And then that was a huge insight. And then there's geological exploration, digging beneath the Earth. And of course, we didn't find hell below the Earth. We just found a lot of rock and a lot of other stuff. And then, of course, developments with aviation, being able to fly, getting in planes and actually being able to go above the clouds and eventually sending rockets into space. We didn't find heaven up there. We just found a lot of dark and expansive space and just vast areas of unknown. So how do we make sense, when somebody comes into our church, knowing about the universe as we've achieved knowledge of it today, how do we make sense of the Nicene Creed, the language of the Nicene Creed? He came down from heaven, became incarnate from the Virgin Mary. How does that even happen? So this kind of creedal language, and not just creedal language, but theological ideas as a whole, I think, are very much embedded in traditional cosmology that grates against our modern sensibilities. And, we can try to wiggle our way around this, and we can say, well, we say the creed. These are true statements, even despite what we know about the world. And perhaps, this is metaphorical, coming down from heaven has to do with Jesus leading a very lowly life. And virgin birth, born of a virgin, well, we all know it, virgin just means young woman. We can try to explain it away that way. But if it's metaphor, then we still are left with the question, what is this metaphor pointing to? What is the ultimate reality behind the metaphor? And that is something we haven't really been able to figure out in the church. We're too reliant on the literal language of biblical cosmology or the creed, and we're not probing enough behind it. And I think people today want an intellectually credible faith. They don't want to check their brains down there at the door. They want permission to interrogate church teaching, doctrine, and too often hard questions are not allowed. And so why bother even joining a community where you feel intellectually restricted? Just forget about it. Stay home. That's factor number 3. Factor number 4, I call this one scandal upon scandal, abuse and hypocrisy. And this is of course a huge issue. If there's anything that undermines integrity and trust, it's hypocrisy. do as I say, not as I do. That doesn't inspire confidence. And so back in the 1980s, as we all know, we can probably remember that decade, there were American televangelists, and Jimmy Swaggart was one of them, railing against sexual immorality, and then getting busted not just once, but twice, soliciting a prostitute. This is a man with quite a large, at the time, TV viewership. And then we had, right around the same time, another guy, Jim Baker, convicted of fraud, embezzling millions of contributions to his ministry. These scandals were years ago, but they've left a lasting impact. And they've created suspicion. There's now a parody. We mock televangelists out there that we see on our TV often because of the association they might have with figures like Jim Baker and Jimmy Swaggart. But it's not just Jimmy Swaggart soliciting a prostitute or Jim Baker embezzling millions. There are crimes of abuse that have been committed by church leaders. And then think of the legacy of the Indian residential schools, operated by churches, the Anglican Church of Canada, for instance, on behalf of the federal government. Students were stripped, as we know, stripped of their language, their culture, abused, malnourished, simply allowed to languish and die, buried with no dignity. There's a book, an expose of all this. Professor John Malloy, the title of the book is A National Crime. And I think that pretty much sums it up, the legacy of the residential schools. And then there's cover-ups of sexual abuse. Not just those plaguing the Catholic Church. Anglicans have been impacted. Evangelical churches have been impacted. The Hillsong Church network has dealt with their own scandals, and recently the Meeting House in the GTA rocked by a massive scandal and has now ceased operations effectively. Doesn't even really exist anymore because of that. They had to close up shop because they couldn't get insurance. So lives have been ruined, people traumatized, trust has been really forever broken. There's a lot of deep anger toward the church and institutional religion in general, and people don't want any part of the church because of these scandals and this hypocrisy and this abuse. And so they are angry with the church and not willing to go anywhere near it. Factor number 5. How am I doing for time here?
Pay attention, but we should probably keep going.
Yep, we're just about got 2 more to go here. Factor number 5. I call this one Sunday shopping, the 7-day work week. When I was growing up in the 1970s, stores were closed on Sundays. You might have the odd place open for emergency stuff, but by and large, things were not open on Sundays. And it's true, not everyone went to church. That is true, but Sundays were at least a day off that everyone enjoyed. And at that time, Canada was governed by something called the Lord's Day Act, and which prohibited business and commerce on Sundays, and it instilled in people this sense that Sunday was, as the legislation said, the Lord's Day, when everyone was encouraged, or maybe even expected to be at church. Now, the problem was, and this is connected to my earlier discussion of immigration, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that guaranteed freedom of religion for everyone, but the Lord's Day Act privileged Christianity above all other forms of faith. And of course, not all Canadians, especially not all new Canadians, viewed Sunday as the Lord's Day. And so in 1985, that act, the Lord's Day Act, was ruled unconstitutional, and that opened up the opportunity for Sunday commerce. And so, I remember the slogan was Sunday shopping. That was a phrase that was thrown around, and that was a consequence of the government's recognition of religious pluralism. Sunday became an opportunity to earn money, to spend money. It became a day of perhaps not just work for some people, but errands and leisure. People would go off to concerts, see movies. That was unheard of before, because all these things were closed on Sundays. You go out for brunch, go to the gym, put your kids in sports activities. Sunday now became a day for all of that, thanks to the striking down of the Lord's Day Act. So who has time now for church when all these other things are now in the mix on Sundays? People work on Sundays. People have their kids in programs on Sundays. People like to get together with their friends on Sunday mornings, go out for brunch. People like to do all kinds of things on Sunday. There isn't enough time to fit in church. And so this has impacted, in my judgment, certainly contributed to the decline of church attendance, and is one answer to why so many people have given up on the church. And then my last reason is factor number 6 here. I call this one lockdown. It's just easier to stay home. The COVID pandemic, that forced all of us to stay away from church, even when we would have loved to be together. And for those already on the fence, for those who were maybe going to church occasionally, but were kind of lukewarm, well, that lockdown kind of sealed their fate in terms of, allowing them the luxury of not going to church at all. Church attendance numbers have not rebounded to where they were from before the pandemic. So my parish, for instance, in the middle of Etobicoke, we have lost half. So since about 2018, if you look at the numbers on an average Sunday to where we are now, it's down half. And I don't think those numbers are going to jump back up to where they were. There are other factors that account for why those numbers have dropped off. Some people have died, some people have moved away, but it's not coincidental that the drop occurred with the pandemic as a major factor. So I think the pandemic has created a bit of an existential crisis for some people. As we know, there's a lot with social media. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, intentional attempts to mislead. There's cynicism. There's suspicion. There's distrust of authority, including the authority of the church. And I think all of that has fed into a reluctance on the part of many people to go back to church. So those are my 6 factors that I wanted to share. Where do we go in light of all these? Where do we go, and what should people of the church do? Well, a couple of points that I'd like to share, and then we can have a conversation. I think we need to take time to understand, and this is what I'm trying to do myself, take time to understand the present reality and its causes. We can't chart a course forward unless really we have a clear grasp of where we're at now in the present and the causes of the current situation. So that's kind of the task that I'm involved in, and I'm sharing with you right now. The second thing I wanted to note is that we need to move forward and not backward. Kwame Nkrumah, the great leader of Ghana, said, "Always forward, never backward." And I think that is certainly advice for us in the church. The good old days are not really good, and they're not coming back. You know, I've given versions of this presentation to other groups, and when the discussion happens afterwards, inevitably people are like, "Oh, if we only did it like, you know, the way we had it before, you know, the numbers would start to grow and we have people." No, the good old days are behind us. We need to move forward, and move forward in spite of what has happened in the past. And that's a big challenge, because we're not going backwards. We're not trying to recover a sense of the way we did things before, because that didn't work, and it's not going to work going forward. We need a new approach to things. So moving forward and not backward. And thirdly, it means, I think, related to that point, we need to embrace change. The way things have been done are really not working for the church's survival and its longevity. And we need to think differently, I think, about our liturgy, about our hymnody, the language of many of our hymns that underscore so much of that theology that's problematic. We need to think about when we gather. You know, is Sunday morning the optimal time? Given the fact that Sunday has become such a busy day for so many people. These are all questions I think we need to explore as we consider what it might mean to move forward and not go backward. You know, I've heard it said that the Back to Egypt committee in churches is very strong. People want to go back to eating the leeks and the garlic, but that was under slavery. And yes, we are in a desert moment, so to speak, but let's move forward. And how are we going to do that? So that's the big task ahead of us. So enough babbling from me. What are your thoughts on all of this?
We have about, I would say, 10, 15 minutes for questions? Or-
Sure, yeah, I'm just gonna go and check the
Yeah.
other.
Okay. So you can moderate that and open the floor?
Yeah. Now the camera here is set up in such a way that it's not going to pick up everybody. So, but hopefully the voices will be heard. So, what are your thoughts about these 6 factors? Did I miss anything? Or what about, you know, my prognosis for how we ought to move forward?
Well, factor number 5, I think you have missed something.
All right, what's that? That's the Sunday shopping. Yes.
Yes, so the economy, the way of living that has changed since the 60s. Remember, there was feminism. Now we have a situation where both people, usually in a couple, are working outside the home. Sunday, you got to get the laundry done. You have to do the grocery shopping. You've got the kids' stuff. It's just, there's too much. And to take a half a day to go somewhere, and you have to put the kids in clean clothes, it's not on. And that sounds trite, but it isn't. People simply don't have enough time. They have to work. Because my dad bought a house for $24,000 with a 50-year term on the mortgage at 4.25%. He could afford that. My mother didn't. She had a part-time job, but you know, she did the rest of the house stuff. We don't, that's not there anymore. So,
Yeah.
I think that's important to acknowledge that.
If I can
Yes.
just add on to that comment, is that I think the 7 days a week change that society went through also created the environment where people don't think about church anymore. The vast majority of people nowadays have never gone to church, never, and don't think about it, and don't have an existential, they go to the mall, they go and do whatever they're doing, and church is just not part of their life or their conversation. So I think that's another reason that church attendance is in radical decline. So.
Yeah, you're right, especially with younger people who have never set foot inside a church. You know, at least people in my generation may have some very distant memory of being in church when they were small, but that's all they have. There are people now that have never set foot inside a church, let alone remember any kind of family discipline about going to church.
Mm.
So you're absolutely right. I think the cumulative effect of these factors is exactly what you're stating.
Something, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to add as well, my dad, who had, I don't think an iota of faith, but he went to church because it was a community where he could see other people, other men particularly, and they had clubs, which are also, all of their attendance is done. My dad was a Mason of all things, wacky, but he belonged to, I don't know, like 2 community groups.
Yeah.
And they would make connections and do, you know, that was where they could go and make friendships. And he saw the church as a way of connecting.
Social connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say something almost exactly similar to that, which is, I think on that number five factor that you're talking about, just the change of our society. It's interesting, I had never thought of it until just hearing it now. The Lord's Day Act actually slowed the economy down, right? Like, so it actually kind of put a restraint on how capital would work.
It had a Sabbath function.
Yeah, it slowed,
Yeah.
and so you're right, your dad could buy a house for however many,
Well,
at that
still,
time.
all of that, you couldn't buy anything for 24.
No, now.
Yes.
You know, now people can't even afford, they can't afford to live in
Yes.
an apartment building in Toronto with 2 people working. So
Yeah.
what happens, they move out of the city, and so the thing that I wonder what our future as a church should be is, you have people who've never gone to church, you walk into this building and you're like, what is this all about, right? Like, what is this crazy thing they're singing and they're reading this ancient scripture, and what is this? But if it were a place of networking, right, a place where people, continue to be a place where people could find community outside of whatever their work community might be, I think that's a vision for perhaps the future. A few months ago, Margaret, they filmed, they had a film crew here to film Margaret, and I talked to the young camera woman at the end, and she's like, you know, I grew up going to church, but I haven't gone for ages. And she said, I forgot, it's a really nice community. It's a really nice place to meet people. And I was like, yes, exactly. She never came back. But anyway, for whatever reason.
Probably one of these reasons.
Well, one of these reasons probably. She probably works on Sunday. And well, she was here working, right, on a Sunday. So, you know, the idea of helping people find mutual aid, finding, you know, just connection, community, friendship, like, you know, so less focused on liturgy perhaps, and more focus on community connection. That's something that talking about embracing change. I don't know what that looks like exactly, because I love liturgy and I love worship, I love singing and I love all that, but I wonder if changing our intentionality around why we gather.
Because not everyone is into the liturgy.
Bingo.
They come for different
They
reasons.
come for different reasons.
And in regards to the pandemic changing a lot of things, during the pandemic, I think it was mentioned at church that I could go online, and it was groups of people in all the communities within the diocese, and they talked about the changes that the pandemic had brought about to their particular parish. And it was amazing that many of them had more parishioners during the pandemic than they did normally. And they reached a lot more people
Through the online.
through the online. And that the one, I remember the one in Peterborough said that they actually then took it online to the radio station. And they actually had their service on the radio.
Wow.
And and that they had attracted people from as far away as South Africa who would listen to them every week.
Yep.
So
Yep.
so there were some positive things to the pandemic, but I understand what you're saying, how it's affected the numbers walking in the door.
No, the digital the digital notion of gathering has certainly redefined what it might mean to be church. St. Clement's Parish up at near Yonge and Eglinton has now appointed a digital pastor, and this is somebody whose primary, actually exclusive responsibility is for those associated with the parish who gather online. Now he was mentioning to me that it's largely a seniors community,
Yeah.
but they've also got people from outside the GTA that have found their way and tuned in, and so he's responsible for
This
keeping that community together and for reaching out.
This is what Austin does at his church. He does all the digital.
Was it Joe? You had your hand up a minute ago, or?
Yeah, I just, on your first couple of points about, church cosmology and how restricted it is and that, and how can there be a God in the face of so much evil? And I was at a play in London a couple of weeks ago, Juno and the Paycock by Sean O'Casey, and it's set in the post-Easter rebellion in Ireland. And there's a great line that, they're saying, why does God allow these things to happen? And Juno says, what can God do in the face of so much human stupidity? And I think the problem is that we don't address it, that we don't say, this is showing us who God is. When we encounter these things, and this is what we need to really look at. The other thing too is when it comes to cosmology, it's not just that it doesn't jive with what we look at when we look into outer space. It doesn't jive with what we've heard in many cases. It wasn't just a neutral cosmology; it's a negative cosmology. Most of the people that I encounter who are they resent the word God. They've never been to church. They resent the word God because God means a punishing creature and the outer, and that negative notion of God is very, very strong, even though people don't go to church.
Yep.
And I was telling Allison the other day, it's not that I heard it from priests when I was going to church. I heard it from my mother when she was putting us to bed. And it's that negativity that has outlasted all the brilliant preaching of any of our denominational interests.
I'm a big fan of William Blake. I appreciate William Blake on many different levels, but William Blake had that very famous painting, Ancient of Days, where you had the man with the long white beard, and he's got the compass that kind of is surrounding the globe, the earth, and that's really Blake's attempt to picture God in relation to the world. The man with the white beard and controlling everything with the compass. That image has I think embedded itself into so many of our psyches in terms of how we understand God as this very distant, cold, controlling, judgmental
Not loving.
figure. And
But-
you're right.
But I think also, so if these are true, these dynamics are true, which I believe they are, then that also shows that a huge challenge the church has for its future is the fact that it's a hierarchy that is very resistant to change.
Absolutely.
And how,
Yes.
I mean, just take a look at me, 35 years of being in a battle to be accepted as a gay person. And it's still not on the books as okay to be gay in the Anglican Church. And some people had the audacity to tell me, well, that's a radical short time frame in the mindset of the church. But the church seems to be locked into this model that liturgically, theologically, preach-wise, models of ministry are so out of date that they're just not important to people. They're just not important.
I didn't even reference that when I was talking about hypocrisy and abuse, but you're right to point that out. That's an oversight on my part when I went through these points, but that's another factor that's part of the whole notion of hypocrisy and abuse is the way LGBTQ plus people have been unable to find comfort and a home in the church,
Well,
in spite of what the church has done,
and we're hypocritical. We have a local bishop who's gay
Yes,
and married
yes.
with kids.
kids.
And we're not supposed to acknowledge that or what? I mean, I tell them, and you're absolutely right. I have gay friends and they say, I don't want to hear about it. It's bad. All of it's bad. Even if when I tell them that this may be something you might enjoy, forget it.
But you see, the other thing is then the church comes along and says, we're okay with it now because we have a gay bishop. The church plays this kind
Problem
of
solved. Problem solved,
yes,
right?
this tokenism that, oh look, we have one.
Yes.
The third pew on the left side, that's where our alcoholic sits. And on and on.
It's
and
almost
on.
like saying, racism doesn't exist anymore because Obama became president.
Yes, yes. So I was at the cathedral on Sunday because I go there once a month to help them in their ministry of anointing. And I was just sitting there looking at what is very finely refined liturgical drama. But I can remember a day when there would not have been a woman or a person of color in the sanctuary, and everybody's back was turned to the congregation.
Yeah.
Because I was on the cathedral staff at that time. And yesterday I was just watching 2 people of color, an entire altar of women, all facing out into the congregation. Now that's changed for sure, but I don't think it's rapid enough, and I don't think it's.
And it's
Yep.
actually not systemic. It's the token
Yeah.
that you're talking about. The actual core of power hasn't changed.
Correct. Yeah.
And the objective of that core power hasn't changed, which is why when we do things, when we try to do church differently, we can hit roadblock after roadblock after
for sure.
roadblock because, I mean, what the good old days? Remember those good old days? That's not how we've done it before.
My religious order has been living, your last point about going back to the past.
Yeah.
We've been doing it continuously since 1971. That's when we had a whole bunch of guys leave the priesthood.
Yeah.
And yet we keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Okay, I do have a question.
That's Einstein's definition of insanity.
Right,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay, I do have a question though, which is, what do you, so
And
this
then we
is-
gotta wrap it up.
I know,
Yeah.
this is because there's food. This is what I hear from people every now and then. Well, so-and-so church is gone back to saying the liturgy in Latin, and all these young people are coming to church. That's why we should go back to the good old days, because young people today, this is how we fill the vacuum that they've been brought up with, you know, this vacuumless world that they've been not tethered to anything. We should go back to what we used to do, because look at all these young people coming in to light a candle and, you know, sing songs in Latin. So,
You want my response to that?
yes.
Well, two things. Sometimes stuff that's really old seems like it's actually really new.
Okay.
And there's a certain fetishization that happens for a little while, and that attracts people to that. I don't think that's the future. I don't. And if it were, more people would be flocking and kind of demanding that kind of liturgy. It's not accessible. People don't speak Latin. They don't read Latin. There's a reason why. I mean, you know, Joe, there's a reason why in Vatican II the Church moved away from the Latin Mass. Because it's just, it's a dead language. So,
We just sang in Latin.
you know,
it was fun.
that's I think there's fetishization going on with that, and I think there are pockets of this type of activity that attract a certain kind of demographic and people with a certain intellectual frame of reference. But that is certainly not going to lead to revival. And even the question of revival is itself perhaps problematic. I think, again, we need to be moving forward, not backward. So, in light of that, thank you all for
Thanks,
your
Jeff.
attention.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, thank you everyone who was listening at home, and thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. We'll have more to discuss when we get home, I'm sure. And I think that's it. Thank you.
That's it. Yeah, thanks.